Hi there, this is Marius with another SAP Tech Bytes video. This time we will build an application with the SAP BTP Kyma Runtime. And it's not a regular application, it's a multi-tenant application. You know, it's this cool technique that you can use to share the compute resources of multiple tenants and only have one HDI container per tenant to store the data of that tenant separately from the other tenants. But besides that, you'll share the compute resources, which makes the entire solution very cost effective. You can use that for your departments within your company, or you can use that for multiple customers of a SaaS solution, for example. So let me show you what we are going to build here. You see, this is the Kyma FAQ management suite, so tenant 1, where we are logged in with a user who has read-only permission to the data. So we see one question is here. This tab here belongs to a second tenant, and we are logged in with a user who has admin access, so you can add new questions if you want to. And I will also show you something cool in the end. I will show you how you can use the SAP HANA Database Explorer to access the data of a tenant directly. For all of this, we are using a lot of SAP technologies. We are going to use SAP HANA Cloud, SAP BTP, Fundamental View, Fiori Elements, Luigi Microfrontend Framework. So you know we have a lot of ground to cover. But before we start, I want to highlight one more important thing. The entire source code is available on GitHub. So go there, fork the repo, clone it, get ready to code along while I'll show you what you have to do. This will be a lot of fun and you'll get your hands dirty. So let's get started. Okay, let's start building your own multi-tenant FAQ management application on SAP BTP Kyma Runtime. Here you see the README file of the repository that is available on GitHub. So if you clone or fork the repository and download it, you should see the very same screen in your development environment. You find the scenario descriptions with the technologies that are involved here, for example, the Cloud Application Programming Model, and a couple of requirements that you have to fulfill to deploy this. The requirements are quite straightforward, so you need a free SAP BTP trial account, and this trial account needs to have a HANA Cloud instance provisioned and the Kyma Runtime provisioned, and you need to have the kubectl and the Cloud Foundry command line interface pre-installed. So let's swap over to my environment to see these tools in action. So here you basically see I have a trial account in region EU10 with the Kyma Runtime enabled, and here you see that I have the Kyma namespaces, which currently only includes the default namespace. And from there, you can download the kubeconfig file. But if you don't know how to use the kubeconfig file yet, I recommend that you check out a few of the links from the description box first, because that will help you immensely to understand what's coming next. Okay, so going back to the code, we basically see that we need a couple of entitlements. I already have them assigned, and we can skip the optional section because we are going to reuse all the pre-built Docker images here. So let's go to the download and installation section, part 1, set up the provider sub-account. And here on top, the first step is to download the kubeconfig file and to log in. I've already done that before I started the recording. And to log in via the CF CLI. That's done as well. So let's create a namespace where our project will live, and the name will be Project FAQ. That's done. So, and in the second step, we will create a config map that contains the cluster domain. Note that there is a placeholder in here that you need to replace with your cluster domain. You can find it up here in the address bar of your browser and copy everything from this C- might be another letter for you until the .com in the end. And by the way, do you already see it? The namespace that we just created? It's already here. So let's paste the cluster domain in here. Let's close this with a quotation mark and create a config map. In the next step, you have to open this file here and add the cluster domain as well. So let's user interface manifest. That's the file that we want to change. Look for the to-do annotation. And here you now insert the same cluster domain that you copied previously. I've already done that here, so I don't need to replace anything. Okay, let's go back. And now comes the interesting part. First, we need a HANA Cloud instance. And currently, you need to provision HANA Cloud instances in a Cloud Foundry space. And if you do that, make sure to allow traffic from all IP addresses. And in the second step, we have to use a service manager that will later add a new HDI container to HANA Cloud per tenant. And this service manager needs to live in the same space as the HANA Cloud instance. So currently we have to do this in the Cloud Foundry environment as well. Note that it's just a workaround and this might change in the future. So let's execute CFS, which is a shortcut for services, to see, okay, we have HANA Cloud Try provisioned in our space. And let's switch back to the dashboard here to see this HANA Cloud instance and note that we allow traffic from all IP addresses. That's what we want to have. Okay, and now we create a service instance of the service manager. So let's copy the first command and just execute it. That's done. And now we create a service key to be able to access the service manager. And last but not least, we basically save the credentials of the service key to a local file that we will use later and upload the information in our Kyma cluster. Bang, so you see the file has been generated here. Nice. And now we basically take this file and create a Kubernetes secret based on that file with the following kubectl create secret command. And to show you that this worked, let's have a look at the file. You see it has like 5 properties here. And let's go to our Kyma console. In the namespace, you can find the secrets in the configuration. And here you see our service manager credentials with all the same properties that we have extracted from the file. Okay, time for the next step. Let's deploy all the single components. First, we have to deploy the backend component. The backend application is just a regular multi-tenant CAP application. You won't find any difference compared to a multi-tenant CAP application that runs on Cloud Foundry, for example. With that starting, now we have to deploy the exporter component. The exporter is a small application written in Go. When accessed, it forwards the authentication token to the backend, retrieves data from the OData service, converts the data to a CSV file, and offers that for download. So the exporter is a classical microservice. Looking good as well. Now let's deploy the user interface. The user interface is a multi-tenant capable app router. If you don't know what this means, I recommend the blog post from the description. But to keep it short, it basically contains the static resources for the SAP Fiori web interface, and it is capable to handle multiple tenants. And last but not least, deploy the service broker. The broker is where the magic of this demo happens. It provides the endpoint that is called by the SAP BTP cockpit to onboard a new tenant, and when it gets this request, it will 1. Create an API rule for this new tenant in the Kyma environment, and 2nd, it will forward this request to the CAP application so that the CAP application knows it has to onboard a new HDI container. You will find this magic happening mostly in 2 files, in the kyma.go file and in the service.go file. You guessed it, this is also an application written in Go. You'll notice this went very fast, but it doesn't mean that it's done. So it just means it started the deployment. And when you run this kubectl get pods, when specify the namespace, you can basically get the status. But you don't need to use the CLI. You can also use the Kyma console to see how the pods are doing. So here you see the same information, a lot of green, but not all is green yet. Same as when you look at the deployments, it didn't finish yet. That's why there's partially some red flags here. But API rules have been created for us. The service instances that we need have been created for us. And it's only a matter of time until all pods are running. That's all green here on the right, and it's all green here. That means we are good. And these are all the steps you require to make your SaaS solution available for consumer sub-accounts. Let's test that. So to consume to an application, to a SaaS solution, go to a consumer sub-account. Note that the consumer sub-account needs to be in the same region as the provider sub-account, and it needs to belong to the same global account. But you don't have to enable any runtime. So you don't have to enable the Cloud Foundry runtime or the Kyma runtime. You just need a sub-account. And then you go here on the service marketplace and search for sample. And here you find our SaaS solution, FAQ sample, FAQ SaaS sample. Then you click on the three dots to select create and leave the default values that are suggested to you. While it's starting, already go to view subscription to see the subscribing action progress. Once you see the green subscribe message, go to roles and pick the role template viewer and assign it to a role collection that you created previously. Here I created one with the name all. Let's add it. And the role collection all is assigned to my user, or my user is assigned to the role collection all. And now I can click on go to application. You will see that this is a very typical SAP Fiori UI with a few options on the left, for example, regular access and the view that you could click to view the data. So there's currently only one question in here. Okay, it's great that everything is running, but let's pause here for a second to think about what this means. So we have our own tenant with its own data that we can access via its own URL. So that means we need an API rule that basically points this URL to our application, and we need an HDI container that contains the data that only this tenant can see. Let's go over to the Kyma console, to the API rules, and here we see, yes, this is the URL that we just saw. So it has been created during the subscription for us. And a second thing that has been created during the subscription by the source manager is an HDI container. So if we expand the source manager, we see 3 HDI containers that were created for us. One is used for metadata management of all the HDI containers that it created, and 2 others are created for each tenant. One that contains the actual data of the application, and the other one is a sidecar. And to validate that this is true, what we just saw, let's create a second tenant, and then we should see a second API rule and 2 more HDI containers, right? Okay, let's do that. And as you already know all the steps necessary, I fast forward here a bit. Okay, welcome back. Note that this time we will assign the admin role template. So click on the plus, select the all role collection, click add, and go to the application. So you see the application looks different now. We have more options on the left-hand side. Because we are admins, we can edit all the data that we see. So let's just append an exclamation mark here, save it, and let's add a totally different question. Okay, so you see that there are two questions now, and what you basically see in here in this panel is a UI that has been written with fundamental view, and the entire UI is embedded in a Luigi UI. And the cool thing about Luigi is that you can combine multiple UI technologies in one page that seamlessly work together. So here you basically have a similar UI that is based on Fiori elements that you cannot see any difference, but you obviously have the full advantage that you have from a Fiori list report application here. But you see the same data, and when we go back to the other tenants application and refresh it, we see still only one question that hasn't been modified. So it's clear that both data has been separated. Okay, let's go one step deeper and use the HANA Database Explorer to actually inspect the data of a tenant. So here we are back in the provider sub-account, and when we expand the service manager, we now see, as expected, 5 HDI containers. And just to prove that I'm not lying, we also see a second API rule here right now. So when we want to look at the data, we have to find out which HDI containers were added newly. So I know that this HDI container has been added and this one, because I wrote down the HDI container IDs that were there before. And now we have to find out or try both containers to find where the data is. So let's start with this one. I have a good feeling that it's always the one on the bottom. And then you click on the binding to see basically the service key for this HDI container with some information that you can use in the HANA Database Explorer to access it. So let's go over here to HANA Cloud Central, click on the 3 dots to open the SAP HANA Database Explorer. On this UI, we select the plus and we want to add a new connection to a new SAP HANA database. And then we just copy the values from our service key here. So the host is this value, port number is 443, HTTPS service port. The password is what's displayed here. Let's add that first. And then last but not least, copy the user and paste that here. You could save the password or enforce SSL, but for now we don't need to do that. And I just call this live. So we see the connection has been established, and now the crucial part is that you use this field here to swap the active schema. So use the shorter one, not the longer one that's selected by default. Select it, and then drill down in the HDI container to the tables. And we see all our questions here. So we can do open the data to inspect the data that we entered via the web application. And let's just say new title. Just add this to 2 and save everything. Now we update the data directly in SAP HANA. And when we go back to our web application, ta-da, you see we changed the same data because we accessed the HDI container of this tenant. Okay, that's it. I hope you liked the demo, and let's jump to the conclusion. Okay, so we rushed through a lot of content in the past 15 minutes. So what did we do? First, we prepared the provider sub-account for our multi-tenant SaaS application running on the BTP Kyma Runtime. To do that, we had to create a new namespace in Kyma, provide all the 4 components, the broker, the backend, the exporter, the user interface, and then we switched roles. We switched into the role of the consumer, of the tenant, and we subscribed to this SaaS application. The first time we subscribed as a viewer who can only view the questions, and the second time we subscribed on a new tenant with the admin role. So we could actually edit and add new records or questions. And with that, we also had access, or then we switched back to the role of the provider of the SaaS solution. And we actually inspected the HDI container that stores the data of the second tenant, and we changed the data in the HANA Database Explorer. So that's really a lot of content. I hope I was able to spark your interest about SAP BTP, Kyma development, multi-tenant development, and that you got the gist of what's the advantage of these types of multi-tenant applications. If you liked that video, please leave a comment in the comment box below or like the video. Thank you. See you next time.